So the first speaker today is Patty Moore. She's CEO of Moore Recycling Associates, Inc. She is an internationally recognized authority in post-consumer plastic recycling, and she's been in the field since 1983. Please join me in welcoming Patty Moore.
I was just a child when I started. No, I wasn't actually. Been doing this a while now, so one of the things I know when you are the first speaker, the keynote, opening things up, is you have to tell a joke. It's de rigueur, right? So fortunately, I have kids. I get a late start on parenthood, but I have 2 teenage boys, and they love really bad jokes. So I get a lot of them. So I'm going to tell you the one about the guy who went to the doctor, and he had a carrot up his nose and some celery in his ear, and the doctor said, "You're not eating right." So, okay. Now, it's clean, but it's funny because it's obvious after you hear it, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here today. It's pretty dang obvious. We need to build our infrastructure. We know that study after study is showing the value of recycling. And study after study is showing the value of recycling locally. It's showing it largely, but also the effect it can have local. ISRI just released one a couple of weeks ago, for example. But there's a myriad of them. We started collecting them in my office, and there are so many. The EPA certainly values it. They have 7 benefits that they believe recycling brings. It helps sustain the environment for future generation. It prevents pollution caused by the manufacturing from virgin products. It conserves natural resources. It saves energy. It reduces the need for landfilling and incineration. And one of the reasons we're here today is it decreases the emissions of greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change. But California has an opportunity to be a leader, and I think that's what we're going to hear about here today. So the EPA says it's good, and amazingly, business and industry agree with the EPA. Okay, there's not that many things they agree on. This is one of them. And we've really seen an evolution in recycling. Most of the policies, the public policies that we are living with today, are based around recycling being a waste management issue. And what we're seeing as recycling is moving and being adopted as a materials management issue. It is, and that's what the private sector has figured out before the public sector figured it out. And goal setting is an example of that. I saw an article recently that talked about the shift in goal setting. So back in the late 80s and early 90s, you saw a lot of public sectors and industry groups setting recycling goals. AB 949, which was passed, in 1989, requiring California to divert 50% of its waste. There's a goal-setting example, very typical of the time period. But today, we're seeing different goals being set. We're not seeing public sector setting these goals anymore. What we're seeing is the private sector is setting goals. And they're setting goals that have to do with materials management. For example, ConAgra, guys, has put forth a company goal to increase recycled content in their packaging overall by 25%. Coca-Cola has announced a goal of achieving 100% recycling rate for its packaging, 100% by 2020. Procter & Gamble has committed to using 100% renewable or recycled materials for all products and packaging, and to help make sure that those packaging materials end up in a valued waste stream. So those are just 3 examples I pulled, of the private sector setting goals for recycling, and seeing recycling as a materials management issue. So we are fortunate that California has set a precedent, and I want to build on how I mean that. What I like to say about recycling is that the system needs support. You have your karma or capital, as someone put it. I like that. Yeah, the first 6 or 7 items of the EPA's thing are good karma, right? But when it gets down to it, we need the capital to make this work, okay? There are 4 things, a colleague of mine, Dave Cornell, clearly articulated to me. There are 4 things you need to make recycling successful. You need an adequate supply, you need technology to convert that supply, you need profitable products for that supply to go into, and you need money. And I think we often forget about that 4th important component because it's not going to work without that capital. So what I'm seeing in the infrastructure today is that there has not been a lot of investment recently. California, we're pretty much ahead of the curve in many ways with collection, partly because of that 50% requirement, and partly because we have a deposit system that has infused a lot of capital into the system. But that is only in the collection. That's only the first of the 4. We haven't really seen nationally much investment in the infrastructure in recycling. There's maybe one exception to that, which is the PET industry in the last few years has invested millions, tens of millions of dollars into converting PET bottles into clean flake or new products. And in fact, the PET bottle industry, conversion industry is concerned about now that first one, which is supply. They are really the exception to the rule. We have not seen the paper industry. We have not seen the other plastics. We haven't seen much in the way from metals either in really that conversion technology. And so why is that? Well, part of it is that the banks are very reluctant to lend to our industry. They don't like to fund startups, especially these days, economic times that are questionable. In untested sectors especially. And one of the things you have to show to a bank is, yes, I have that supply, yes, I have the technology, and yes, I have a market for my material. If you can't show the bank that, they're not going to have much interest in you. And our system is broken right now, in my opinion, because we are not providing that guaranteed supply and looking at those end products. In the past, I can remember when New York City, I don't know, it seems like just the other day, but it was probably 15 years ago or more, decided that they wanted to they wanted to invest in the infrastructure of paper recycling in New York City. And they actually put out an RFP and guaranteed a 20-year supply, or maybe 30-year, I can't remember, supply of material to the winner of the bid, so that they could then go to the bank and say, yes, okay, I will have that supply, and here's my end markets. And I think that's part of how our system is broken today. Venture capitalists. I actually get a lot of calls from venture capitalists. They're really interested in this issue. Everybody wants to be green, right? And so do the VCs. But they want to invest hundreds of millions of dollars. And the reality is really the conversion technologies for our industries aren't hundreds of millions of dollars, which doesn't seem like it should be a bad thing. They're really tens of millions of dollars or even less in order to really invest in that infrastructure. And they come to me and talk for a while, and they go away discouraged because I can't hand them a $300 million project where they can invest. So we have the banks that are not so happy about it, and then we have the VCs that are not really so happy about it. So that means that we have to step in as the public and the public sector. And other countries are doing that. Other regions are doing it, but mostly other countries are doing that. And what's the big example? China, right? Everybody talks about China. We heard about China earlier today. The Chinese government is going to double its investment in what they call the circular economy this year. They have made a commitment to double it. And that's doubled over previous years. They define the circular economy as 3 principles, which you will recognize: recycle, reuse, and reduce. Now, they take that beyond materials. Energy is included in theirs. And right now, energy is a big focus of their circular economy. They're trying to reduce the energy consumption. But at the same time, they are providing financial support and tax breaks to draw investment into this circular economy. And it's working. It's working for them. They obviously are pulling a lot of material. I've heard people call China the big suck. All of our material going over there, right? Well, there is something that we don't hear about much, which is that their economy is growing very rapidly. You have heard that. But they are generating a middle class that is now generating a lot of scrap of its own. When I first started working on this, on the plastics recycling, and China was pulling our material over, that was their only supply of scrap, right? Last year, what they imported, and I know plastics, I don't know as much about the other commodities, I admit, more than 2/3 of what they converted into new raw material as scrap was domestically generated. They have their own supply. They're not going to need us, and it's not far away. We've already seen that impact of that. Earlier this year, well, and again, I'll come back to what I know, which is the PET bottle. We saw on the East Coast prices soaring high. There was huge demand. Oil was up early this year. Virgin materials were up earlier this year. And yet we saw on the West Coast, granted our price had already risen fairly high, but I was expecting to see it go even higher because of those, you would think those were the set things needed to see the price continue upward. But when we talked to the buyers, they said, we can't go any higher because we have enough internally generated, Chinese-generated scrap, that they are telling us they can't pay more because they can get it cheaper here. And I think that's a little window into what could happen to us if we're not smart as an industry. How about in the end of 2008 and beginning of 2009? You know, it's funny because I went to at least 3 hearings at the state level about recycling and during that time period. I bet you all went to a few yourselves. Everybody was talking about, oh, we got to work on the infrastructure. We got to develop the markets. We got to do it here. Soon as the price went up again, nothing, right? But just remember, there were piles of paper everywhere. Where are we going to put that paper? Well, it was all over the place, stashed, and many of you in this room may have been stashing at places and wondering. But it's funny how quickly we forget. So it is really important that we look at this issue of investing in infrastructure.